I'm Michelle Pilley, the Managing Director and Publisher of Hay House UK. And I'm incredibly excited today to be speaking on Mary Magdalene's feast day, which is a very wonderful and auspicious day for us to be having a conversation with a friend, an elder, and a guide, Apela Colorado. Apela, aloha, welcome.
Good morning, Michelle, and good morning to all of you who are tuning in, listening, and seeing this conversation this morning. So let us begin. Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina. Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Yana Hawaina, Hena Heneo. We give thanks this morning. Sungwai Dizan Yahweh, Yahweh, Onanjagin Yahweh. We give thanks to life this morning. We give thanks for the virtual fire that we gather around all over the world, to the gift of technology. We assemble like our ancestors of old, facing catastrophic earth changes, global pandemic. We look to you, ancestors. We listen. And this virtual platform of Hay House helps this to happen. Let us join our hands, our hearts, and our minds as we step forward and approach this beautiful ancestral wisdom, our heritage. We ask permission now, Onanjage, Mother Earth. Please, please, may we enter your wisdom, that we might come ever closer to you and hear from you the things we need to know, corrections we can make, expansiveness that we can rejoice in, so life could continue to the 7th generation. Mama, oh, I know all my relations. Amen.
One of the many things that you've taught me is how to properly introduce yourself in a sacred way. Could you explain a little about that and why it's important, please?
I remember an Aztec elder telling me, a matriarch, we don't discover people, we meet each other. So I'm over here in the United States. And if you see the light flickering, it's just a bulb needing changing. It's not revelatory, although it might be. Anyway, so we meet each other. And here in the United States, since European people arrived, American Indians have asked the same question: who are you? And in my book, Woman Between the Worlds, I answer that. I answer it for my family, for my people on both sides of the Atlantic Ocean, and for all my relations.
Thank you. I know as you were growing up as a child, it was your grandfather who pointed the way to you as an incredible influence on you. Could you explain a little about your relationship and talk about him?
I can. He was, and I think of him now and I smile. He had a really good sense of humor, this kind of American Indian humor where the vicissitudes of life are something, if you have the chance, you have a good laugh with them. And we did that. We did that for sure. But the main thing that he gave to me was this deep, deep unconditional love. And in the as I discuss this in the book, but growing up in absolute wilderness and of the North Woods, it's a hard physical life for people. And I grew up in a time when we carried water to drink, had kerosene lights, no, really no electricity, no running water, no full toilets. And if you want to wash your clothes, you go down to the stream and you collect tubs of water and bring it up, light a fire under it. Gardens, and if you need heat in your house, you go chop wood and bring it back, wading through the snow sometimes. So that's the life I was born into. And I'm really glad, because I'm probably the last generation of people here in the United States to have that closeness with nature. And in the sort of rough and tumble physical environment that I grew up in, there was a lot of alcohol and there was a lot of physical violence around me. And that also shaped me. It put in me this, or I wouldn't say put in me, it awakened in me a purpose why I'm here. And as a child, like I would just over and over and over just have vivid fantasies and dreams of healing my family and what it would take to heal my community. And somewhere in there, and I think it was my grandfather's love, somewhere in those just vivid, sometimes anguished prayers and visualizations, there was a firm belief that it could be done. And because I've always been a rebel and an upstart, I was certain I could be the person to do it too.
And he knew that about you, because he kind of nudged you as well, didn't he? So,
Yeah. Yeah, he told me the last time I saw him, and it was really,
yeah.
it would make a good Hollywood movie, the setting, actually. I was coming home from school and we had a little station wagon, because I grew up in a grade school. All 8 grades were 23 kids and 1 teacher in a 1-room school in the woods on Turtle Lake, right? So we had a station wagon that would drop us off. One driver, of course, Grant Spaeth, and he drove up the hill, the last hill, to where our house was overlooking Birch Lake. And the snow had accumulated about that much, and big fat drops were coming down, but they were getting finer and finer. So you could tell that a big storm was underway. And there was my grandmother and grandfather's car, which was black. And for them to be there in a snowstorm and at the end of an afternoon was totally unusual. And you, even though I was a kid, you could feel death. That was the pronouncement. I went into the house and my mother told me that I had to sit with my grandfather. And while she and my grandma were talking in the kitchen, that was the pivotal moment and in my life. And I was really, really angry with my grandfather then, because the love and the closeness, I was his spoiled grandchild. I was his favorite, and I knew it. And I like so, and that love that we shared disappeared when his drinking became active again. And that was probably when I was about 10, 11, starting to get into preteen changes in life. And I basically lost him. So they made me sit with him, and he'd been in a car accident. so he would go in and out of time,
Right.
like in his life. And I was just angry. And I just said to my mom, do I have to? And she says, yes, your grandma's tired. She just needs to talk to me a little bit. So I sat there and seething with resentment. And he was in this over a stuffed chair in front of me. And he didn't walk with a cane normally, but he was so ill and near death. He had one and he was holding the cane, and he looked at me and he said to me, he said, Apela, you're a very precocious child. And I didn't know what that word meant. I don't even know how he knew it, but anyway, it made me mad because I didn't know what he was talking about. And then he said, and you're pretty. And when you grow up, the boys are going to like you. He said, but they won't like that you're smart. And he said, and it's going to cause lots of problems. So I'm going to tell you something and listen to me. And then he said the words that transformed everything. He said, remember the pipe. And he repeated it 3 times. And I didn't even know what the heck he was talking about, what pipe, but off in the background, I could hear my grandma, and my grandma was mostly European descended. And I could hear her say to my mom, your dad's been asking me for his pipe for the last few weeks, and I have looked everywhere, and I have brought every kind of pipe to him that I could find, and including, I even found one, like she found it in the back of a dresser or something like that. And when I brought it to him, he picked it up and threw it at me. And of course, what Grandpa was looking for was his pipe to pray with.
Yeah.
But the way his mind was, he couldn't explain that.
Yeah.
And my grandma didn't know what he was talking about. So those words set me on the path of the pipe. And later on in life, when I got into, just the things that happen in life, the challenges as we mature, and relationships and children and jobs and school, all those kinds of things. It wasn't until I got really, really, really in a tough spot, and I was in a POD meeting, and all of a sudden it just came. I saw it. I could see the moment lucidly when he told me that.
Oh.
Okay.
Yeah. And in terms, I know for you, the pipe has been a very central teacher and guide throughout your life, and directed you. It's been very important for you as well to strongly embody the Oneida tradition that you were born into as well. Would you be able to speak a little about the Oneida and the people and their ways of being in the world?
It's a dangerous question to ask because people are known for oratory, right?
Don't worry.
Well, yes, I can say
I know. Well, you're a great storyteller. You're a great storyteller, but it's
so. Yeah, in my native language, the name for ourselves is Oneida-Gaul, and it means people of the long living or everlasting rock. And that's important. I mean, it's important to my people, but it was also an important thing for me to grow by. Like, what does that really mean? And how do I be a rock? And how do I communicate with a rock? In colonization, then the name changed. On this side of the Atlantic, we say Oneida. Okay. But
that's Oneida, my error of pronunciation. So
that doesn't mean anything really.
Right.
It's just what made silverware in biscuit flour or something. So anyhow, so here's how I started out. Like, learning about this indigenous path and entering this indigenous knowledge. There's a point in middle age I said, I really want to know, how do I talk how do I talk with this rock? In the old days, when my people would go move from place to place, we had and we have, it's a huge boulder, and that boulder would levitate and move with us, right?
Yeah.
And I knew that, the rock's important because the rock carries the story of life, because life begins with the rock, right?
Yeah.
And that's true whether we're Oneida-Gaul or Christian, where it begins with Peter, right? Which means rock.
Yeah. The rock. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
so that's a nice conversion, or but anyway, so I decided I really want to learn about the rock. And I'm not a person given to going to like gem stores or anything like that, but somehow I was in Alberta, Canada, and I was in a bookstore, and then there were some stones there, and I came across this lovely, like, disc-shaped rock. It was maybe that big around and absolutely flat. It's as if someone took a round ball and squished it, because you couldn't see layers, right? And it was iridescent green, and if you moved it, you could see purple and yellow and lime green, all of that. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
And it just spoke to me. And even though I thought in my native way, this is not really the thing to do, to buy a rock, but I did it. Okay. So that night I go home and I'm looking at this rock, nothing, right?
Yeah.
More nothing.
Yeah.
So I said, okay, I'm going to do what a scientist friend told me, the late Dr. David Pete. He told me that when he got in trouble with doing his calculations and so forth, he was a physicist, he would take his notebook and put it under his pillow. And then when he would wake up in the morning, he would have an answer. So, okay, I'll give it a whirl. So I hold the rock and then I make a prayer, just like we open today, ask permission to enter this sacred knowledge, because wisdom is feminine. And African tribal people will tell you, for a man even to make love to a woman, he must first get on his knees, right?
Yeah.
So we get on our knees in the face of the divine feminine. Please, mother. So I talk to this rock, slip it under my pillow, go to sleep, wake up in the morning, wow, an answer. And it said, the answer, and I heard it as I was waking in my mind's ear, my mind's eye, whatever.
Yeah. Nice.
There was, I said who I am, and I'd ask who it was, and it said, I'm bedrock communication. Wow, I got it.
Wow.
And then I realized, this is a rock with a sense of humor. What else would it be but bedrock?
And you went, one of the first women to go into academia, and and you found yourself, I know, at Harvard and Brandeis, to do your doctorate. What was it like being a Native American woman in academia at that point?
Terrifying. Terrifying. And I had a really good faculty advisor. There wasn't anyone trying to make life difficult for me, but the setup in old school academia was extremely patriarchal, and coming out of Greco-Roman traditions, right?
Yeah.
And highly competitive. And I was so out of my realm. I remember one day seeing a limousine drive up early in the morning before classes started. A limousine drove up, chauffeur gets out in his uniform, opens the door, and a young woman with raggedy jeans and, sweater, whatever, and armload of books steps out, and the chauffeur's holding the door, and a friend comes up and they just visit, and he's still holding the door. I'm like, wow. I look at my beat up Ford Pinto, babies and diapers
Yeah.
in the back and all.
Yeah.
Um, and just things like my late husband Joe, Joe Colorado was full-blooded Apache, and at that time when I'm a young woman, we didn't people in reservations, like we didn't travel around, and in my parents' time that you weren't allowed to leave the reservation without government approval, right? So there wasn't, it was really hard to be able to connect with each other. So to see a full-blooded Apache in Waltham, Massachusetts was quite unusual. And I remember one day he was talking to me before I went into my classes. He dropped me off and was going to leave. And I remember these women coming up, fellow classmates, and they just like swarmed him and stepped between he and I, and felt they had the perfect right to do that and be that way because we were so objectified,
Right. Yeah.
And then just it was so competitive and so foreign and so everything abstracted. It was the opposite of indigenous ways of knowing and being. But that said, like, I want people listening to this, hearing this, to know American Indians have lost, in my generation, they were in the Southwest and the West, there were some tribes still fairly intact, but most of us had suffered great losses and loss of lands, culture, language, identity. So I, even with that though, growing up in the North Woods, that grounded me in a way. And I always was close to the pine tree, which is our sacred Skanagoa, our tree of life. It's like a moment of Skanagoa is electrifyingly alive. And it's also the term for our great law of peace, right? I wanted to find that peace in my life. And one thing I knew, Western academia, the way it wasn't going to do it. I used to be so afraid going to classes, I would throw up in the morning. And one morning as I faced the doorway, there's this skinny little pine tree about that big around, and I put my hand on this pine tree, just asking my ancestors for help. And in that moment, it came to me that when I got out, I was going to create an academic program. At the time I said, so no Native person will ever have to do that again. And then later I found out, as I actually did it, I found out that Native means all of us, but for the truth to be real, it must be lived. And this academic program helps us live into it.
Yeah.
So, and by the way, when I wrote the book, we talked about starting the academic program at California Institute of Integral Studies, but now really good news. We have found a new forever home. And it is,
Fantastic.
yes, even better. It's at United Nations University for Peace in Costa Rica.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Yeah.
Yay.
Well done.
When
Amazing.
when I was a young woman, I had heard about this university starting. It was in the 1980s.
Okay. Yeah.
Oh, I wanted to be a part of it. And
Yeah.
a man one of the co-founders, Robert Mueller.
Was it Robert Mueller from the? Oh, wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Amazing, man. Amazing.
So, but he was so kind. Like I wrote, no internet. I wrote to him. I called him every time. He was so kind and generous and inviting. But like I had nothing to offer, right? So just I could be there. And then 35 years later, I found myself in Costa Rica 2 years ago signing an agreement with the university to set up the Indigenous Science and Peace Studies Masters, and then it will be a PhD as well, and to create the Indigenous Science Research Institute. Okay, I'm signing this document. I look up, there's a picture of Robert Mueller.
Oh, how lovely. Oh, that's fantastic.
I don't know if I answered your question.
That's, you know, a brilliant circle to be completing there. I know. And but I can understand going back to that time for you as well, that time you also embraced the American Indian movement aim at that point as well, and were very strongly an activist because there was so much work to do and so much awareness to raise. Can you speak about the importance of the movement in those times and why it was so vital?
The most important thing is that it provided a node or a nexus for American Indians to come together nationally and to support each other. That led to something called the Pan-Indian movement. In the literature, it's referred to as that way, where we started, well, we say amongst ourselves, like, what does our life actually come down to? And it's that we travel around, we pray together, and we help each other out. And we were allowed to do that again, to move again and not be confined and separated. The separations ended through the American Indian movement. And then also a growing, it wasn't a social media yet, but there was news coverage, and it was a time, it was a moment in time, and it was a good moment when people would be concerned with human rights and social justice. And that's part of what also helped me get into my master's and doctoral program.
Right.
There was a commitment for the first time to get minorities into these programs. And then through that, I was in the AIM days able to be a student board member of the group that wrote the American Indian Child Welfare Law, the American Freedom of Religion Law, the American Indian Education Act. I was in on all of that.
Extraordinary times, and so vital to make a change in that. Thank you.
On another thing, this is, I was just burning cedar when we started. I was a young woman. You couldn't even do that. Cultural practices were administratively outlawed. And it was, by the way, it was 1978, as you know, when the American Indian Freedom of Religion Law was passed. Canada did theirs a few years earlier. And now with the American Indian movement, then it led to like civil rights movement and everything. And then bookstores on human liberation, political and liberation, and religious freedoms and so forth, and human rights. So you can go into bookstores now and buy smudge sticks. Imagine my time, you couldn't have it or do it.
It's incredible. Hard for so many people to know of those times and to understand that repression at that point. And I guess, sorry, go ahead, Peter.
I was going to say, I think it's key what you said, though, about, it's hard for people to understand. And then we should ask, why is it hard for people to understand, especially people of European descent? There's a colleague of mine, Dr. Jürgen Kramer, who's a psychologist, often talks about this psychological term, and he calls it the normative pathology of dissociation.
Right.
Yeah, and it's,
could you explain about that? That's I think it's so important. But
which is, getting back to Woman Between the Worlds book.
The
book is written to directly address that and present that.
And
open up a path, I hope, for readers, right? So in the West, just like me growing up, American Indian, Oneida, and French, I didn't know that much about either side, right? And one side was deeply rooted in my American Indian ceremonies, because when something, those ways were suppressed. And then it just happened that in my time, they started opening up, but they were as they had been because it's been suppressed, right?
Yeah.
Like time travel, you know, here are the ceremonies the way they've always been, untouched by colonial missionary forces, right?
Yeah.
So I woke up in that.
Yeah.
And then I could see what was missing on my white side. I
Yeah.
said, wow, we've been totally robbed and nobody even knows it anymore.
Yeah.
If you come to the US, you really see it. Like people
Yeah.
don't know even what if you ask somebody, who are you? They'll say, oh, well, you know, I'm Norwegian, I'm German, I'm English, whatever. Well, that's a nation.
Yeah.
Not your soul and your core idea. Who are you?
Yeah.
Who are you? Right?
Yeah.
And it's through our mothers and our genealogy and our tribe that relates us with everything, with the earth and all. Right?
Yeah.
So I looked at that and I said, wow, I want my French tribal ways back and I want them now. I knew we could do it because we had done that at Oneida.
Yeah.
We had gotten back what we had lost.
And you've been on a quest to do that because you reached a personal crisis in your own healing journey, and realized that you had to open that door to the Gaul, to the tribe, that part of you, and open that up for others as well. Because I think very much you're a pathfinder, a wayfinder, aren't you, in everything that you do?
Can I jump in there for a minute?
Yeah, please do. Please do.
That's the thing about Mary Magdalene, and it's her feast day today.
Yeah.
Okay, think about this. I go to France. I went the first time when I was 19, and then I didn't get back till about 30, and I kept looking and looking. And I had a complete history. There was a priest in it, well, lots of priests and nuns in our families going back. And then I had a complete history going back to about 1260, not just genealogy, but a history. So I was following that. I went to France and I'm visiting these villages, and one of the villages is in the south of France. So I got there, and why did I get there? The trip was a gift from a benefactor, and she gave this to me, Diana Stone, because I was recovering from breast cancer and I was terribly, terribly ill. And she wanted to inspire me and uplift me. And at the same time that I had the breast cancer, these dreams would come to me, and I would see this young woman, like long flaxen haired, and she would be running through a woods, and men are trying to kill her, and then, you know, like nightmares like that. And then one time I saw her sitting on a bench with her head in her hands, and she's looking out at a burial mound, like you have it set in who, like that, a mound like that. She's sitting like in a monastery, looking out between pillars at that hill, and just weeping and weeping and weeping. And I was, in my dream, I was standing there, and she looked up. Of course, I was a spirit, but she looked up, and I looked, and I beheld her. So the invitation was really clear. It was time to find out about that side of my culture. And I went out and I prayed, and that was the answer. And I didn't want to do it. No, because I don't want to be exiled from my native side. I'm already half disposable because I'm half white, you know. I don't want to estrange myself more. So I didn't want to do it. So I get to the south of France. I said, okay, I'm doing it because that's what was open to me. So I went there, and I got to the south of France, and I see all these gypsies. I never even met a gypsy before. There were gypsies everywhere. And I had arrived on the feast the night before the feast day of Mary Magdalene and the three Marys.
In the caves, in the Marie Demoiselle. So go on. Sorry, Peter.
So anyway, that's when I went past this old Roman Colosseum. There was a big sign there. It says Gypsy Kings tonight only. Wow, they really are gypsies, right? So Yeah, the musical
So,
group, of course. So
yeah,
that night, a visitation experience of Mary Magdalene happened to me.
yeah.
I was just, oh, wondrous. And
Mhm.
if you could see my office now, there's a huge stained glass window of that visitation experience. And
Yeah.
out in our ceremony room, which is indigenous, is a big 5-foot statue of Mary Magdalene. I prayed to get a statue of her because there were none in France. How can you
Right.
be a patron saint and not have
Yeah,
any?
yeah, yeah.
So then a couple of years of looking, going 2 or 3 times, my friend and I walked through the medieval museum, and in the gift shop coming out, we stopped dead in our tracks. There was like a duplicate statue of one from the Louvre. It's like this one 5
Oh.
feet high, like, oh my God, I'll have to mortgage our house. Well, how am I going to get this moved? But I did.
Oh, so
Yeah,
wonderful.
so, oh wait, so the
Yeah.
point of this is,
Yeah.
so I wake up from that visitation experience, just ecstatic actually. And
Mm.
then the thought goes through my mind, like, oh my God, like, does this mean I'm Catholic again? And then my activists, well, American Indian people, my activist friends will say, I'm betraying our people.
Right.
And then I was like, I'm just like drunk in love with Mary Magdalene. I'm going for it. And she opened the door. It was through her aegis that I got to the painted caves of France. And my ancestral village is just like a half hour away from
The
the
caves in
caves.
Dordogne,
Yeah.
yeah. And you
Yeah.
take people there, outside of the lockdown times, but you take people there every year. And can you talk a little bit about the caves and the ceremonies that you lead there?
Um, well, the caves are one thing that happened, coming to the caves, and I have a really beloved friend there. I'm not going to name him. Actually, I have. It's in the book.
Yeah, exactly.
Pascal. All right, I am
Yeah,
good
yeah,
at it.
yeah. Yeah, yeah.
So I met Pascal, and that was just
Yeah.
a gift from God and Goddess, and a gift from the trickster too, because he
Yeah.
great sense of humor and this funny guy and
Yeah.
brilliant. And he grew up in the caves, all of his life in the caves, and he's authored a book on them, and he's
Yeah.
a mystic as well as a scientist. And so every year and this is another thing too, because I had a couple bouts of cancer and typhus
Yeah.
and all kinds of stuff, and found myself, even with a PhD from Ivy League, like unemployed and everything, and still a way would open up. Someone would give me a ticket, or there would be a meeting, or I got one year I got to France 4 times,
Oh.
and my total income for the year was $10,000, right?
Oh,
That was I think second bout of breast cancer that I had.
yeah.
And anyway, so I met Pascal, and he watched me very carefully. The painted caves are a national treasure, and they're really
Yeah.
protected, and rightfully so.
Yeah.
With Pascal, and he watched me for 3 years, I think, before we ever did anything, like even pause for a moment of meditation in the caves. But he always watched my daughter China and I before we would go into the caves, just like
Mm.
entering this conversation now. When we enter the womb of the earth, these caves, the mother, we asked her permission to enter. And every
Yeah.
time we go in, we would do that. And I would light my smudge and say a prayer, and he would just watch. Then later on, as years went by, because now I've been going like 17 years, I think it is. And later, about 7, 8, 9 years into it, he told me something really wonderful, wonderful to hear. And he said that just that example of China and myself doing that it was something that they were looking for, because those caves are so sacred. I mean, imagine
Yeah.
those beautiful paintings were made before there was a Europe, before
Yeah.
there was China,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, absolutely.
And if and
Yeah.
you go in there and it's like our European ancestors could have left 5 seconds ago. The
Yeah.
paintings are that fresh and beautiful.
Yeah.
And the feeling again just has that numinous quality to it. And you know, when you go in there, you can feel something's watching.
Yeah.
We know who she is too, at least. And boy, does she have surprises for us. So,
Yeah.
and then you come out and when you come out of the caves, you give thanks. But there's a communication that happens in there, and Pascal helps it to happen.
Mm.
So I have taken student groups there and occasionally still small groups there, but it has become decidedly ceremonial.
Yeah. 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 As opposed to scientific. No, wonderful. I mean, there are so many extraordinary experiences. You describe many of them in your book, and we've got no way of kind of just talking about them all. But I wondered for you in terms of the really pivotal and influential times in your life, and I'd have to point towards Alaska and the influence of Chief Danawak for you, because that was a very important time, wasn't it, in terms of gathering who you were and learning your way. Could you speak a little bit about those times in Alaska?
Chief Danawak was a Raven clan from Southeast Alaska. He was a Tlingit, and he was a storyteller, not in a casual way. He knew, and his practice was sharing these stories under the right circumstances. And what he told me is that I couldn't ever tell these ancient stories, like the Raven story. One Raven story, I think I write about it in the book, where he said, this is the first story. There are no stories before this. This story comes from the time before the Earth's crust was formed, right? And what is the story? The story is about Black Raven and White Raven. And, White Raven is a pure spirit and everything. And Black Raven is the shadow and mischief. And the end of the story is, don't put yourself above another person. Keep yourself like that. So these problems of ego been around for quite a while, apparently.
No, thank you. And it would be lovely as well to talk a little about, I know your journey when you founded, it's important to talk about WISN and the foundation you founded, which is, the World Indigenous Scientific Network. Can you talk about the aims of that organization and why you felt it was so important to protect so many elders and teachers like Chief Danawak and other elders and people that you were meeting? Because,
well, my own, as our conversation has gone on, what's come out is the reality that what's been taken from us through the forces of genocide. I mean, all of it, right? The forces of history, what the forces of history have taken from us, our connection to the earth, our ability to hear her, to love her, to engage with her, and all of our relationships. And the ability to honor our line, our heritage. Like many people, as you know, of English heritage or German heritage, it's like, forget it. British Empire, Nazis, forget it. But those are like gargoyles at the door. That's a test. The history of our peoples, your people, my people, it's huge, right? That's a moment in time, but it's a moment in time we have to address and go through for the other part to open up. So what I noticed growing up between the worlds and then seeing how we got in Wisconsin, because we were a relocated group of Iroquois people, seeing that power that we lost, that we could and did get it back. That's what gave me the confidence and the place to, I knew where to stand when I went to France in myself, but I didn't know if it would still be there. Oh, I've got a story I have to tell you about that.
Go for it.
All right. So after knock on the door, right? So after I went to France and I had the Mary Magdalene experience, I did wonder, like Harrison Ford in his movies, Indiana Jones, where he looks down in the pyramid and there's all these snakes in there. And he says, snakes, why did it have to be snakes? So for me, I'm going to France looking for my identity, my tribal identity. And I woke up and I said, saints, why did it have to be saints, right? You know, I want my tribe. I don't want more Catholic, whatever. But I had to learn to, I had to reconcile with it. Even when, and I talk about that in the book too, what it took. And when that happened, wonderful things came into my life, including finding my way to the caves and all of that. But I remembered being, you know, out in that, standing by that tree at Brandeis, and I said, wow, you know, I really want to get this program going, because it takes too long as an individual in the Western or Eastern, in the modern world, the associative world, individually, it's very, very hard, if not impossible, to find our way back. So I wanted to build a fire, to make a place so people could find their way there again.
And you've protected, there are many healers who are under threat. You've been in dangerous situations at times in various countries where you've been trying to help support healers, teachers, elders who are under threat from either from governments or other circumstances. And
yes, that knowledge, you know, that it answers the question, like, why, especially as women, why don't we come forward more? Why don't we reclaim our rightful powers? You know, giving birth to babies, we have that, but we give birth to many other things too. And but why we're silent? Of course, you know, there's all the oppression and suppression of women. But it has truly just become normative. You know, women's movement, and I was a part of that for a while, but I couldn't do both American Indian movement and National Organization of Women. I had to be one or the other. So I did that. But people would probably be shocked at what I'm going to say now, and that is that Native healers still around the world, in the less developed countries, meaning countries that still have energy resources and water and agriculture, they're targets of nation states and also of corporate interests. And they have found out or remembered that the quickest way to deconstruct a Native community is to kill the elders. I have a quote in my doctoral dissertation from the 1600s where a minister, Stockholm, is saying, until we cut the throats of their elders, you know, we won't have success, right? So that in Kenya, a few years, there was an 18-month period just in the last few years where over 200 elders were killed, knowledge carriers. And the same thing is happening in like parts of the Philippines and Central and South America. And in the developed world, it's still happening with like a slow institutional strangle, you know. So I mentioned, like, I've been arrested in Siberia when I was with the Buryat people, and arrested at like 10 at night, speaking of the knock at the door. 10
Yeah.
at night, the police, Russian police come and haul myself and the women, the 3 women I was with at this snow leopard ceremony. They haul us into this really scary looking jail and take away our passports and our phones and anything that would help us get out of there. They took away from us, and they interrogated us from 10 at night till 4 in the morning. And they made us sign confessions, and it was because they could do whatever they want to you, right?
Yeah.
And then the thing that the real awakening was, at 4 in the morning, it's okay, well, we're going to let you go now, and then we're deporting you. You got to get out. But we didn't really know if they're going to let us go. And we didn't know until we got to Moscow and we come up to customs or come up to immigration, and raked us over the coals again and tried to make fear in us. And you're waiting for that clunk clunk when they stamp your passport. And I made us sweat, but anyway, coming out of the interrogation, they take us down to the lowest level of the jail, and like a dungeon. And there, I mean, these people, the Siberian people, are treated so badly by Moscow. They didn't have computers, they didn't have typewriters. Everything that they were doing, they had to write out longhand and perfect penmanship. And we get down to the basement area, and what's there? State-of-the-art Hewlett-Packard fingerprint machine.
God.
Those bastards.
Totally.
How can business just go on no problem? But you come for a snow leopard ceremony and you get arrested. And that's going on all over the world right now. A similar thing happened in Ethiopia. And the thing is, when I'm going to these places, I can feel ahead of time when it's really, I can feel it. I know when I'm going into, like, I might lose my life. And I'm filled with terror and fear. But and on these long flights, I'm thinking, well, why did I do it? I never should have done this. I wish I weren't doing this. But I always know, I never do it unless it's way inside. I know, no, I'm called to do it, and I'm doing it. Without that ancestral. Okay, so I'm in Ethiopia, and speaking of Mother Earth speaking with us and how we communicate, I was at a sacred site. We were completely transparent, trying to organize an elders gathering outside of the capital, Addis. And this was in the last government, the Tigray government, which was notoriously cruel. And they had already murdered one of the elders we worked with, the Basa Gayo, arrested him and tortured him and murdered him, right? He's in his 70s, like me. So I was plenty afraid, and we thought, to be really transparent, we let the government and everything know what we're doing. And we're going to this site that was taken over by the government at that time. And they're making it be like a national holiday instead of the sacred ceremony it is. So it's okay if we tag our gathering onto that. That should be pretty safe. So we get to the site, which is really, it's at the base of an old volcano, and there's a lake. It's just breathtakingly beautiful. And the Southern Ethiopian people especially, but have these sacred sites that are basically just grassy square, looks pasture lands, and then surrounded by trees. And then there'll be a central sacred tree in this grassy area, and they're always just impeccably spotless. And you approach it, and you can feel the presence of ancestors and the earth's power and life. So we get to this place, we get out of the car. I'm with my Ethiopian colleagues, 2 of them, and another woman who runs a nonprofit in Kenya. And we have the government assigned this young woman with us, presumably to keep us company and help us out. But she was actually quite passively aggressive towards us and not helpful in the least. But we get to this place, and then here's a tree. So I go and I kneel down and I make an offering. My friend did with me. And off to the far corner, I see some young guys standing there watching, and they're dressed in dress pants and white shirt. And the look is not welcoming.
No.
So make the prayer, we get up, and then I notice there's litter all over the grounds. And I'm like, what the heck? This is something's off here. So we're walking around, and then some more young guys come from another direction, and then over here, and they're coming closer, closer, closer. And we were praying, and my Ethiopian friend says, we need to go now. So we get up and we walk, and because they're closing in, we don't want to run because we don't want to invite them to really excite them to grab us. But we're walking, and just as I took a step, my right foot leading, I looked down at the earth, just watching my step. Walk fast, but don't run. And there on the ground, like if you took a black marker, there was a 5-pointed star with a circle around it that appeared. And even then I looked, and as scared as I am, I'm like, what was that? And I look behind me, of course, there's nothing there. You should never look back. One of the things never do it. It's always a mistake, right? So you think, did I see it or I didn't, right? But okay, so now we get arrested, and the person who's supposed to be the head of the tourist bureau is a government agent. And it only took her 5 minutes to take us from hi, I'm whatever, or who are you, to inciting absolute terror. She led us, like she was trained, she was trained, right, to interrogate. And that was her style, right? Absolutely instill terror. And how, when you haven't done anything, how can you prove your innocence, right?
Right.
And I was sitting there, oh my God, Ethiopian jails. Anyway, so and she got up to do something to build the terror a little more. She left the office, and I was looking, and there was a flag on her desk with the circle and the 5-pointed star in the circle. Later, that turned out it was one of, under their government, the Tigray government, that was one of the new flags that was adopted. But that wasn't, I was familiar with the one that looks like with the lion that's like this. And when I saw it, then I said, we're going to be all right, because the earth had spoken to me. And she was showing me this is going to happen. But the fact that she did show me told me there's something a whole lot greater than the terror that I'm feeling right now. And if I die now, I know I'm in loving hands by the earth. And that's, and sure enough, the woman let us go. But we had to wait 2 days before we could, for our exit. And you don't know if they're going to grab you, if the police are going to grab you, it's at immigration. They don't let you leave the country. So here I am, old lady, taking dangerous. When you're telling people, go with Apela on one of her tours.
I know. Yeah, you have to think twice if Apela invites you somewhere. I know. But I know, and I think most of those people like myself who love you, very happy thinking of you there on Maui in a very beautiful circumstances with so many wonderful elders and teachers. It's been an amazing sanctuary for you living on Maui, hasn't it? And I know you were called there by a vision as well. So it's been an amazing journey that's brought you there. So,
one of the things a psychologist friend of mine pointed out to me, she said, you always live, I had a place in California because I was teaching out there a lot. So I had a place that was in a hacienda, an architectural digest hacienda from the 1920s. It's beautiful with a mature garden. And so I had a guest house in that big compound, and she was saying how beautiful it was. And then when she said, you always live in such beautiful places, I thought about that. I said, wow, I mean, I'd never considered it. I grew up in nature, and then everywhere I went through life, except for the hell time in Boston. I was always in a natural place. And I said, wow, you're right. And I said, what do you think that means? She's a psychologist. So, that's how you talk to psychologists, right? So she said, I think it means that you love the earth and the earth loves you back.
That's very beautiful. Yeah.
But also, let me point out on balance, before I landed on my feet in paradise, in my young first 20 years of work, I was in the subarctic and I was in the Arctic.
Yeah.
Yeah. And when that all changed, I was on the Yukon River, and my room in my hotel was so cold. I had on these big moon boots, they call them, because they look like what astronauts wear, white boots and a parka with a wolf like this. And I had to sleep in that with this blanket, and the wall had like a glaze of ice on it. And when I got up in the morning, I didn't have to get up early. It was already about 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. And I went outside and opened the door, and it was totally gray with ice fog. It was probably about, I want to say about 30 below. And I looked around, I said, oh, this is cold. I just kind of like, I've done so much cold in my life, And lo and behold, I ended up in Maui.
Yeah. Wonderful. As we kind of tie the threads of our conversation together here, Peter, I'm just wondering about that, the common thread, because you met so many elders and teachers in the messages and teachings and the wisdom that you've met. What do you think that all those elders and healers are saying that we as humans really need to understand in this time?
That you're precious. You're a part of all of it. We need to wake up in it. Awaken to the power and the peace of our ancestors, and understand not it's here and here. They're here all around us, and to really value our family line, to really value it. Everybody has like aunts or uncles, there's always troublesome people in everyone's family and troublesome histories. There's no culture that hasn't been both a colonizer and colonized. There isn't. So that's the key. Face that dissociation of our family line doesn't matter, our mothers don't matter, the family graves don't matter, the sacred sites don't matter. Like we would hear people say, I'm American now, right? Or I'm British now, or I'm German now. So face that loss, man and woman up to it, face the loss, because that's where the power is, in that darkness of the loss and the forgetting, and access what Baba Credo Mutwa, esteemed Zulu elder, used to tell us, which is that, to remember the power that we have, and we all have it. Reclaim it. So face those shadows and come into the healing of the earth, and into the new cycle, the renaissance, if you will, of this new time, or we surely shall all perish. We're at the end, according to Native people all over, to the prophets, to the wise people. They say that we are at this time between worlds. And the between worlds times happen, these great cycles of time, 26,000 years, that are akin to the precession of the equinoxes. Coming to the end of a cycle means you come full circle, so you can see the past you can see more readily where you've come from and who you are. So this, what your gifts are, what your purpose is. And in this great cycle of time, we can evolve or we can perish. It happened for me in those childhood days, praying for my family to heal and my people to heal, and growing up in a pristine wilderness pretty much. That desire in me led me to South Africa, where, as I mentioned, I met Credo Mutwa. And I went out to the cradle of humankind, it's called. And there was a dig headed by a young, first ever young Black tribal woman, Zulu woman, was the head of a dig and over other African men. And when I got to that site, I just, two things happened. I was so amazed to be there, and I asked her why she was doing what she was doing, how she got in that position. And she said, well, all my friends ask me, why are you out here? She's a pretty young woman. She said, it's dirty, it's cold. And why don't you just come back to the city with us? And she said words that were life-shaking for me. She said, I told them, I don't mind. I'm digging for my ancestors. And that's been my life's work too. I left her after a prayer together. And if you ever have the chance to pray with Indigenous African people, you really want to do it. Even if you don't think you're the best praying person, your skill set is not what you would desire, do it, right? I walked away from there, and it was winter in South Africa. Everything is brown and gray and drab and death, I walked to the edge of this hill and I look out, because when I left this young woman, unaccountably, like 4 steps away, these tears, like projectile tears, started coming down my face. And I didn't understand what was happening to me. And I walked away because I didn't want to be embarrassed. And I walked to the edge of the hill and I looked out, and instantly I saw a sea green ocean or sea. And the feeling in the air was just beautiful, sensual creation. And then of course comes the rational mind, like, wait a minute, what is this? Can't be happening. And it was gone like that. The power of it was such, when I turned and I walked away, and I met another woman traveling with me, a Cherokee, an African-American woman, Audrey, her name, Scott Williams. And she said, Apela, look at this rock. And I didn't want to say anything because I was crying so hard. She said, you see these white marks here? I said, yes. And she said, the star people have been here. The star beings have been here. So I got down to the truck that was driving us around. And the Hawaiian elder, Mr. Makua, was sitting on the second tier of seating, so that sort of his hip level was just right about here for me. And I thought, I want to hold this emotion and just let him feel it, and maybe he can explain to me what happened. And he just looked at me, and he's a big Polynesian man. His fingers are the size of a cigar, And to Polynesians, the head is really sacred. You don't touch another person's head. But in that moment, without me saying anything, he leaned forward and he put his hand on my head like this, and he said, you remember. All the way from star beings to putting on our animal skins, taking on our human nature, up through Ethiopia and Rift Valley, to Central Asia, Kyrgyzstan, to the caves of France, where that's all recorded. My childhood prayers to heal my family and do what my grandfather advised, remember the pipe. has been lived, so it's real. And you, Michelle, and Hay House, help me give it away, because you can't have anything unless you first give it away. And I thank you, because people should know, like, this book took 8 years. And in that whole time, Michelle Pilley never gave up hope in me and kept encouraging me. And because Michelle knows what creation and birthing a story is, and the story pulls it all together. And this book, and my prayer and hope for you now listening to this, is you remember your original story. You remember your ancestral line, which will take you to the story, and revivify. Ah, mama. Ooh, I know what.
An extraordinary time. Thank you for everything that you've shared and brought to us and shared with us today. Do we want to hold something in sacred completion at this moment? That will be lovely.
I light the cedar again. The now legal to light cedar.
Oh.
And I remember now the words of our beloved, esteemed Halimakua, who would not be wise to walk the path so long traveled by the ancestors. Oh, I know. Now the prayer is released and conversation as well. Thank you.